What is up, ladies, gentlemen, and NBs? Welcome to the latest episode of Rabbit Hole. I'm your perfect and humble leader, Chris Valenti, and today we're going to be diving into the rabbit hole of Reaganomics, trickle-down economics, and American manufacturing. Because as you know, right now we're going through this era of economic turmoil with all these crazy tariff policies being thrown around. And I figured now would be a good time to give you guys a comprehensive understanding of American manufacturing and what happened to it. Why did we start offshoring all of this stuff? And how did Ronald Reagan play a role in this? So we're going to be doing a deep dive into that. But before we do, I just want to remind you to like, comment, subscribe, and hit the notification bell. That costs you nothing and it helps me immensely. If you do want to help the channel financially, because this is real independent media, there's a couple ways you could do it. You could become a member. You could become a patron. You could buy some of the merch. You could use the discount link for Ground News down below. There's a couple of different ways you could do it. But without further ado, let's dive into this and let's really talk about this. So what we're talking about right now is the fact that American manufacturing doesn't really exist. Yes, we make some things like corn and soybeans and guns and shit like that, but America imports fucking trillions of dollars of goods, okay? We are a nation that is addicted to cheap Chinese shit, okay? And because of that, these increased tariffs that we're throwing on Chinese goods, I'm about to burp. Oh, God. Because of that, these increased tariffs that we're putting onto Chinese goods are leading us into this new economic depression. But how did this problem start? Well, this problem started with Ronald Reagan's tax cuts. See, what's important to know is that the post-World War II era in the United States, the U.S. was making a fuckload of money with wartime production. You know, we were in the arms race, the space race. We were competing against the Soviet Union. We were making the most expensive shit, Operation Star Wars, Rods from God, anything and everything that we could convince the Soviets to create, we did. Because we could afford to keep on making it where they couldn't. Once we started to enter like this period of the 70s, right, this competition between the US and the Soviet Union being the main global manufacturers, while other nations started to pick up the pace. Nations such as China, right? All other nations, not just China, but they started to pick up their own industry, their own manufacturing, right? And this idea of globalization, this idea of a world market and free trade suddenly started to spawn in, where these giant companies figured, hey, if I can cut corners by importing goods rather than making them here, why don't we do that? That's when we get to Reagan's tax cuts. See, let's read a little bit of this. The phrase Reagan tax cuts refers to changes to the United States federal tax code passed during the presidency of Ronald Reagan. There were two major tax cuts: the Economic Recovery Tax Act of 1981. Let's get a little coverage here. It was an act that introduced a major tax cut, which was designed to encourage economic growth. The act was enacted by the 97th Congress and signed into law by U.S. President Ronald Reagan. And also the Tax Reform Act of 1986. The tax cuts popularized the now infamous phrase, trickle-down economics. And it was primarily used as a moniker by opponents of the bill in order to degrade supply-side economics, the driving principle used to promote the tax cuts. So, what is trickle-down economics? Well, trickle-down economics, also known as horse and sparrow theory, is a pejorative term for government economic policies deemed by opponents to disproportionately favor the upper tier of the economic spectrum. So essentially, you got to think of it like a fountain with different tier systems. Trickle-down economics is the belief that if you lower the taxes for the top 1%, the wealthiest people in this nation, the business owners, the CEOs, right? If you lower their taxes and allow them to maintain more of their wealth, the theory is that their wealth will trickle down onto their workers. But here's the thing, it doesn't. And that's because trickle-down economics is inherently reliant on these CEOs and businessmen and billionaires to not be selfish. And as we know, they are. So we're going to keep on reading this a little bit. The first tax cut, among other things, cut the highest personal income tax rate from 70 to 50%. So what does that mean? It means that the top 1%, the people who are making the most money in this nation, they were paying 70% taxes, but now they only have to pay 50% taxes. Now, granted, for the working man, they also got their tax cuts too. For the average working class, right, it dropped from 14% to 11%. So it did help the average Joe, but not nearly as much as it helped the 1%. This additional 20% of their wealth that they were allowed to hold on to because Reagan lowered their tax cuts. Reagan and the GOP were convinced that they would reallocate this wealth to the workers, to the people, almost like communist theory, like rather than forcing the 1%, the bourgeois, to give their money back to the proletariat, just hoping that they would do it. And of course, they fucking didn't. But what did they do? Well, during Reagan's presidency, a little thing started to happen, which was called offshoring, right? Offshoring is the practice of basing some of a company's processes or services overseas so as to take advantage of lower costs. Now, why did a whole lot of companies start to offshore? It was because Ronald Reagan started passing all of this deregulation, the removal of regulations or restrictions, especially in a particular industry. Reagan wanted to boost the profit margins of the 1%. So he figured, he said, if I start to slash all of these regulatory policies, I pass deregulation policies, I make it easier for these companies to make money, they don't have to follow as many rules, they don't have to pay their workers as much, then they'll make more money and they'll pass it down. This is what trickle-down economics is. But that's not what happened. With the deregulation, they decided to do offshoring to places like China or Southeast Asia, Taiwan, all of these giant companies like Ford and General Motors and IBM and Nike, right? You know about like the jokes of small Chinese people using their fingers to like sew the laces of the Nike. I'm not making that joke. I'm saying you've heard the jokes. Those jokes are rooted in a reality that starting in 1980, and the problem was exacerbated by Bill Clinton, George H.W. Bush, George W. Bush, Obama, Joe Biden, Donald Trump. Since 1980, American manufacturers have realized that they can make more money by moving overseas and hiring non-American workers. Because here in America, we have minimum wages. You have to give them health and dental. You can't abuse your workers. You can't use children as workers. There are a lot of these regulatory practices that prevent massive profit margins. But these billionaires, these CEOs, these conglomerates, all they care about is profit. They don't care about what is right or what is fair. They care about profit, 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 profit. So they practice an offshoring, right? So a little explanation of trickle-down economics. We've talked about this. Trickle-down economics is an economic theory that suggests that tax cuts for the wealthy and businesses will lead to economic growth and job creation. The theory assumes that the wealthy will invest their extra money, which will then trickle down to the rest of society, but they don't. Now, here's the thing. I could explain this, but I couldn't do the best job. We have Robert Reich here. He's going to actually we're going to watch a short little video from Robert Reich, and he's going to explain it. We're going to butt in every once in a while for fair use, but let's watch Robert Reich explain why trickle-down economics does not fucking work.
To the extent the Republican Party has any economic platform at all, it's trickle-down economics. Now, unfortunately for the GOP, it's based on three giant myths. It's time to debunk them once and for all.
See the fountain that I'm talking about? Essentially, trickle-down economics is this: you pour more money into the top, and the theory is that this is going to be like think about it like a king, right? You give more money to the king, and the king trickles down his wealth to the lords, and then the lords trickles down his wealth to the landowners, and then the landowners trickle down their wealth to the peasants. This is what Republicans believe will happen if you give tax cuts to the rich, but it doesn't happen. And see how the glass is just getting bigger and bigger? That's what fucking happened. This is a perfect representation. This is a perfect representation.
Tax cuts for corporations and the rich create more and better jobs.
False.
Wrong. Corporations used Trump's giant tax cut to buy back shares of their own stock and boost share prices.
Exactly. This is what you see too, is that when you let these people maintain more of their wealth, they literally reinvest it into their own companies when the stocks are short. And this is what you saw recently with market manipulation all across the entire fucking nation as Trump's tariff policies crashed the economy. All of these people within the White House started to gobble up the short, and then suddenly Trump puts a 90-day pause on his tariffs and it goes back up. That's what you're seeing. Market manipulation, insider trading, the expansion of the 1%.
From 2017 to 2018, stock buybacks increased by a staggering 50%. Lowe's spent $10 billion on stock buybacks in 2018 and then fired thousands of workers with no notice or severance.
Fuck.
Walmart and AT&T also laid off thousands of workers. And contrary to the claim that the tax cut would boost wages,
around a $4,000 pay raise.
Bullshit.
a recent analysis found that in the year after the Trump tax cut, wages increased by about the same as they did before it.
Yes, because if you decrease the taxes for the rich, all that happens is the rich get richer. You don't need to be a fucking genius to realize this.
And then slowed. Tax cuts for rich individuals don't trickle down either. The rich simply get richer. 2 years before Ronald Reagan's first tax cut, the richest 1% of Americans owned less than 23% of the nation's wealth.
Which is still too fucking much,
A
dude.
decade later, after 2 rounds of tax cuts for the rich, they owned over 28%. By 2019, after more tax cuts for the rich by George W. Bush and Donald Trump, people at the top owned almost 35%.
And that number has grown even more. The 1% pretty much own the entire stock market. Now, the stock market is sort of like a reflection of the U.S. economy. But as you're seeing the stock market go up and down because of these stupid fucking tariff policies, you have to understand that these are just a reflection of the feelings of rich people. The feelings of the billionaires, the CEOs, the 1%, the bourgeois, those people are the ones who control the stock margins. It's not up to free trade. It has nothing to do with global trade. It has everything to do with the privatization of every single industry in the United States. Don't forget, Ronald Reagan privatized the health insurance industry. He privatized the healthcare industry. He privatized the prison industry to the point where these fucking, the incarceration rate in the United States skyrocketed during the Reagan administration because these industries were making more money by filling up cells. The healthcare industry was making more money by denying claims. Profit matters more than human life to these fucking people.
Of America's wealth. Meanwhile, average wealth barely budged for the middle class and went negative for the bottom 10%. It gets worse. During the pandemic alone, America's 664 billionaires added $1.3 trillion to their collective wealth and now own over $4 trillion. That's almost double the wealth of the bottom half, 165 million Americans. But no.
So what he's saying, because this is pretty old, this has been updated since, is that the 1% own more money than half of the Americans combined, okay? They own more than double of our fucking wealth. And yet, seemingly, the GOP, the Republicans, the Conservative Party, all they want to do is lower their taxes.
Nothing has trickled down. Even before the pandemic, wages stagnated. Tax cuts for corporations and the rich spur more economic growth.
False.
Baloney. Not even Ronald Reagan's surging economic growth rate was driven by tax cuts. It was driven by low interest rates and humongous government spending. George W.
That's
Bush.
the thing, guys. Government spending can be a good thing. We saw this during FDR. The government has fucking trillions of dollars. If the government uses that money to actually create programs that provide the American people with jobs and create American manufacturing, then we could come back. We could come back from the fucking 60 years of neoliberalism, just shipping off all of our industries overseas. But instead of doing that, instead of the government spending its money on that, the government wants to increase the prices of American consumer goods through this giant tariff policy so that the additional money that you are paying at the grocery store for imported goods can fund the new tax policy. That's how they want to do it. Increase the taxes for you, decrease the taxes for the rich, and let them make more money with the slim chance, with the belief that they'll do the right thing and let the money trickle down to their fucking workers. It is child's play.
Promised his 2001 and 2003 tax cuts would pay for themselves. Remember that? By spurring economic growth. Well, that didn't happen. A 2017 study led by one of Bush's former chief economists found that the tax cuts had no significant effect on growth. In fact, growth declined, slowing to just 2.8% from over 3% during the Clinton years.
Yes, because as we know, guys, if you actually treat your workers well, if you pay your workers well, then you start to see more innovation. You start to see more economic growth. It doesn't take a fucking genius to understand that if people actually enjoy coming to work and they enjoy their life, then they will be more willing to work harder. It doesn't take a fucking genius. Or maybe I'm just a communist, Marxist-Leninist.
The economic expansion under Bush was one of the weakest expansions since World War II. Donald Trump claimed his tax cut would be like rocket fuel for the economy and would spur annual growth of 3%. After its first year, in fact, growth declined. Finally, a recent study analyzing tax data spanning 50 years from 18 advanced economies found that tax cuts for the rich only benefited the rich
No shit,
and had no
Sherlock.
effect on job creation or economic growth. I, for one, am shocked. Deregulation spurs economic growth.
There's that deregulation we were just talking about. No, it does not. What deregulation does is it gives the rich a chance to pocket more of their money and reinvest it into their own fucking businesses.
Well, that's just more rubbish. The cost savings from deregulation go to corporate executives and major investors, while the costs and risks land on the rest of us. Trump's Environmental Protection Agency rolled back regulations on everything from clean air and water standards to dangerous chemicals in products.
This Robert Reich is from the past. I mean, if only he knew that we have literal raw sewage in the fucking water now.
Benefiting chemical and fossil fuel executives and investors while forcing everyone else to deal with polluted air and toxins. His Labor Department loosened child labor laws and scaled back the number of workers eligible for overtime pay. Companies raked in savings while workers were exploited. And with the help of Congress, he rolled back banking regulations put in place after the 2008...
Let me explain something about regulations, guys, is that regulations are not meant to put the boot on your neck. Regulations are meant to keep you safe and put the boot on the neck of these giant industries who love to take advantage of the American consumer. It's the same thing with like the CFPB, right? The anti-scam police that Doge completely defunded and slashed the entire program. If you ever got, scammed by like a giant banking institution, the CFPB would be somebody that you could call to be like, hey, I've been scammed, and they would do the investigation themselves. We have reached a point where the Trump regime and Doge are defunding any sort of regulatory practice that protects you, the American consumer. That's what we're at right now.
Financial crisis to the benefit of rich Wall Streeters and the detriment of everyone else. Don't forget, Ronald Reagan's deregulatory agenda allowed for-profit healthcare companies to flourish, contributing to the out-of-control healthcare costs we are now saddled with today. And remember, deregulation of the financial sector was a major cause of the 2008 crash, as it allowed banks to make risky bets. In other words, the Republican trickle-down claim that deregulation helps us all is baloney. Regulations that protect you and me from being harmed or fleeced or shafted, injured or sickened by corporate profits and services are worth the cost.
Absolutely.
So don't fall for trickle
according to Trump and Doge, that's all waste, fraud, and abuse.
down nonsense. Making big corporations and the rich even richer through tax cuts and regulatory rollbacks doesn't make the rest of us any better off. It just makes big corporations and the rich even richer.
No shit. Thank you, Robert Reich, for explaining that. Now, again, I want to move on to how this problem was exacerbated with the creation of NAFTA, right? The North American Free Trade Agreement was a trade agreement signed by Canada, Mexico, and the United States in 1992. So this is under, I believe, Bill Clinton. Came into effect on January 1st, 1994. It established a free trade zone in North America aimed at eliminating tariffs and other trade barriers between the three countries. So now here's the thing. I'm all for trade. It's just that in America, we import so much more than we export. We have a trade deficit. We don't produce fucking anything in this nation. Nobody buys American. American products are dog shit, notoriously dog shit. The only thing that we make well are fucking firearms, okay? And is it a coincidence that the number one thing that we fucking ship overseas are weapons? It's our number one sale, okay? We make weapons. This is why the military-industrial complex and the wartime production sector is the most important part of the U.S. economy. I wish it fucking wasn't, but you'll never see an American president who doesn't support the military-industrial complex because that's how we fucking pay for everything. So we start making more of these trade agreements, and it gets... The problem is exponentially worse once China joins the World Trade Organization, December 11th, 2001. After a lengthy 15-year-long negotiation process, China joins the global trading system, right? And this is when you start to see American consumers become treatlerites. We become addicted to these tasty, cheap little fucking treats from China. I mean, this goddamn mouse is made in China. I'm sure this fucking mug is made in China. It is! It's made in China. This fucking vape is made in China. My mic is made in China. American consumers are addicted to Chinese goods, and it's become so status quo that most people don't even know how many Chinese goods they have in their fucking house. Most of the goods in your fucking house are probably Chinese, okay? Oh, it's absolutely incredible. So China becomes a member of the World Trade Organization on December 11th, 2001. After the agreement of the ministerial conference, the admission was preceded by a lengthy process of negotiations and required significant changes to the Chinese economy. Its membership has been contentious with the substantial economic and political effects on other countries, sometimes referred to as the China stock, and controversies over the mismatch between the WTO framework and China's economic model. I mean, now, the very last thing that I want to point out is this. Now we're moving into today, okay? Trump's China tariff shocks U.S. importers. One CEO calls it the end of days. Now, if you have been watching my recent videos, we have billionaires like Kevin O'Leary demanding that Trump puts a 400% tariff on Chinese goods. We've already reached a 145% tariff on Chinese goods. We're seeing this effect on the U.S. market. It is on the fucking decline. And things are only going to get worse. The fact that we import so many of these goods, the American president quickly upped the ante with China, raising the levy to 54%. That has been increased so much more ever since. China produces 97% of America's imported baby carriages, 96% of its artificial flowers and umbrellas, 95% of its fireworks, 93% of its children's coloring books, 90% of its combs. We get everything from fucking China, and Trump's answer to this is to lower the taxes of the rich and increase the price of goods for all American consumers. This is a problem that can be rooted back to Ronald motherfucking Reagan, whose slogan was "Make America Great Again." And what I find truly ironic is that it seems like Trump, with his tariff policies, he's trying to undo the fuck up of the great god of conservatives, which is Ronald Reagan. Ronald Reagan is like idolized by conservatives. They have this weird mythology surrounding him. Meanwhile, everything that Trump is doing is this desperate attempt to bring back American manufacturers and undo the dog shit that Ronald Reagan fucking threw upon us. That's the rabbit hole. You just made it out the end. Are you okay? I know it's a lot. I know it's a lot, and my train of thought isn't even that easy to follow for me. But regardless, we made it through. We made it from Ronald Reagan's fucking dog shit tax policies, allowing billionaires to just save all of their money and realize that they can make more money by offshoring their fucking businesses and hiring foreign workers and cutting corners and saving all of this profit and reinvesting that money into their own businesses. And now we've reached the point where Trump is trying to undo all of that in the sake of conservatism. It's fucking ridiculous. Anyway, this is a long one. Thank you for tuning into The Rabbit Hole. I'm your perfect and humble leader, Chris Valenti. I'll catch you in the next video. I think Sunday is my day off. Who knows? Maybe there'll be a surprise video. Who knows? But thank you for tuning in. I'll catch you on the next one. Have a good one.